So, welcome to Job Quality Matters, building workplace wellbeing and engagement into the new normal for businesses. As you will have heard me say, if you joined very promptly at past, this webinar is the first in a series of events planned to celebrate the launch of the PrOPEL Hub. So what is the PrOPEL Hub, you ask? The PrOPEL Hub is a major new initiative designed to help boost productivity and wellbeing through supporting the growth of better workplaces in the UK. It involves partners from universities across the UK and the CIPD. It aims to provide practical lessons, ideas and toolkits for businesses to draw upon, all informed by the very latest research and evidence. It's funded by the Economic and Social Research Council for 3 years, and this is our first public event. Although the project was designed before COVID-19 hit, we fully intend to be part of the spirit of problem solving and building back better that's necessary to address the crisis. What I would like to do now is introduce myself and introduce our panellists for today, and then we can get on with the main webinar itself. So, I'm Helen Fitzhugh. I'm a Knowledge Exchange Fellow for the PrOPEL Hub and a Senior Researcher at the Norwich Business School, University of East Anglia. That means that I'm involved in workplace wellbeing research, but also tasked with translating the findings of my own and colleagues' research into useful briefings, blogs, podcasts and more, so that cutting-edge research is available to UK businesses. We're joined by Professor Colin Lindsay. Colin is Deputy Director of the Scottish Centre for Employment Research at the University of Strathclyde. He conducts research on workplace innovation and he teaches human resource management at undergraduate, postgraduate and doctoral level. Hello, Colin.
Hello, Helen.
We're also joined by Professor Kevin Daniels. Kevin's a Professor of Organisational Behaviour in Norwich Business School at UEA. He led the What Works Centre for Wellbeing Evidence Programme for Work and Wellbeing and leads the team at UEA working with RAND Europe exploring practices and combinations of practices for health and wellbeing at work. Hello, Kevin.
Hi there.
Okay, so now that we've done our introductions, what we're going to talk about today is wellbeing and engagement in the new normal for businesses. And as this is the first event for the PrOPEL Hub, what we're going to do is ask you to say a little bit about how you came to be involved in the PrOPEL Hub. Why are you here talking about productivity, engagement and well-being? So Colin, if we could start with you, how have you come to be involved in PrOPEL?
Thanks, Helen. Thanks for chairing this session, and it's great to be here with everyone discussing the launch of the PrOPEL Hub. How do I arrive? How does my team arrive at the PrOPEL Hub? My team at the Scottish Centre for Employment Research at the University of Strathclyde has, over the last 10 years, been undertaking a range of research on workplace innovation issues. I guess our interest comes, in the broadest sense, on workplace innovation, comes from a shared belief that innovation isn't just driven by new technology or by high-tech firms, but that in fact, good job design and effective workplace practices can empower employees across a range of positions and sectors to contribute to innovation and productivity. That's a piece of work that we've been working on for many years. As part of the PrOPEL Hub and the broader ESRC funding around productivity research, we're taking forward a major programme of research with employers, and we're still open to work with employers. That's my first plug and offer of the day to any employers tuning in who would like to work with us. We're very keen to collaborate. Our project is called... Yeah, absolutely, there'll be more plugs to come. Our project is called Improving Management Practices, Work Engagement and Workplace Innovation for a project. But I guess the project really speaks to the idea that we are interested in working with employers around the idea that job quality matters. And one of the reasons that job quality matters is that it's very important in feeding in to people's experiences of engagement. I call it employee engagement. We use the term work engagement in the workplace. And we are also interested in the idea that there's a relationship between job quality, employee engagement or work engagement, and what employees then deliver for organisations. And there's quite a robust evidence base that suggests more engaged employees are more effective in the workplace, deliver more what we might call in-role behaviours in terms of in-role performance, in terms of doing the job well, deliver more extra role activity in terms of going the extra mile. So there's a reasonable evidence base that we can already work on that says jobs matter. Jobs matter because they feed into, good jobs feed into more engaged employees, and more engaged employees are more productive for organisations. But here's the two additional elements that my team is really interested in. One, especially in the challenging post-COVID environment, we're particularly interested in the extent to which there's a relationship between effective job design, good quality jobs, engagement, and employee well-being. And there's possibly no more important challenge for employers right now than helping people back to work, and back to work in a way that their well-being is secured. So that's point one. Point two, we're particularly interested, as we always have been in my team, in workplace innovation. So to what extent is there a relationship between good job design, people's levels of engagement in the workplace, and then their ability and capacity to innovate in the workplace, to identify new ideas, get those ideas heard and communicated, and then to realise those innovations in the workplace? What kind of jobs can we build that will help people to be healthy, productive, and innovative in the new normal? That's basically the starting point for our research.
That sounds like really important research, especially innovating for the times we find ourselves in. And we're going to be talking about that more in a moment. But first, I would love to also ask Kevin Daniels the same question. How have you come to be involved in PrOPEL, Kevin?
Well, it's a long story, I guess. So, but like Colin, I'm very excited to be part of this particular hub and work with all the other institutions across all of this thing, and also certainly Strathclyde, Cardiff, and ourselves have as partners have a strong interest in job quality. But my background is as an organisational psychologist, someone who works for 30 odd years in safety critical environments and looking at psychological health as an outcome, but more from the point of view of risk prevention and risk management. So much of that research has been funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council in the higher hazard environments and the Health and Safety Executive in the more normal work environments. But I suppose what has happened in how we think about things, so it's a shift from, say, work that was funded on looking at facilitating return to work for people with musculoskeletal or common mental health problems. So the productivity link in there is essentially about minimising absence or absence management, if you like, or risk mitigation strategies. So that's trying to prevent people from exposure to some of the most toxic working practices like bullying and abusive behaviour. And our focus has moved in the past sort of, I guess, from 2015 to much more looking at what enhances the experience of work, what enhances well-being at work. So it's much more about the promotion of good health and well-being than the prevention of ill health and ill-being. And so we started working with the What Works Centre for Wellbeing, the team at UEA, and now we're working with the PrOPEL Hub and with our partners around Europe. So there's like Strathclyde, there's a team of us based at UEA, and we have collaborations with other institutions as well. And I suppose a consistent pattern that emerges, and I think you'll find that Colin and I will talk about these consistent patterns of findings from research going back, it's really from the 1950s, if not before, that job quality matters for well-being, it matters for productivity, it matters for innovation. A high quality job will minimise the risk of work-related psychological injury and actually minimise the risk of, or help minimise the risk of work-related physical injury as well, because high quality jobs, what we'll go on to talk about in a second, are also associated with safer working practices, especially in safety critical injuries. And many of the things will also contribute to innovation through encouraging employee voice and employees sharing experiences and ideas, which, sharing knowledge on how to solve problems. I think a really, really good example of that I use with our students is the Andon Cord at Toyota, which is, the ultimate, I think, expression of job control, because anyone can stop the production line to solve a problem and everyone comes around to help. And so to innovate. And I think what we find, and again, they'll be finding this at Strathclyde, they'll be finding it at Cardiff, and we find as well that job quality boils down to several elements that seem to work together in some sort of way. So we mentioned the kind of job control, that is employees having input in the day-to-day tasks, how they do their job, so it's not overly prescribed. Role clarity, reasonable work-life balance, high levels of job security, training and development, all those kind of things. Interestingly, in our research, we've also found performance management as something that goes in with high-quality jobs, and most people would think, well, the performance appraisal is actually quite a stressful experience and being set targets. But we do find the characteristics of high-quality jobs tend to co-occur with formal performance management processes. And we tend to find those high quality jobs are associated with better well-being, health, and various other outcomes that I've mentioned, like safety and productivity. And I think within our particular project, our focus is very much on what organisations do to manage health and well-being, and job quality is actually foremost and central within that, because although the evidence on things like mindfulness practices it's quite convincing that on a day-to-day basis, it's how people do their jobs, how they interact with others that affects their well-being. So the greatest contact time, if you like, or touch time, is actually with the job itself, and that is legally in the UK, but also practically the best place to intervene.
That's great. There sounds like there's really a lot of overlap in the work you're both doing. And also both very much guiding us towards thinking about how jobs are constituted and made up, rather than thinking that well-being and engagement has to be an extra on top of what you're doing. And so I think we've seen quite a lot of interest growing in well-being at work, engagement at work. They can sometimes be buzzwords. But do you think that will have changed now that we have hit this new COVID-19 crisis? Our world is looking quite different. So are the findings that you've had so far around well-being and engagement still relevant in the new world we're looking at?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, that would be great.
Well-being focused. I suppose one of the things that we're interested in is actually whether, because we're working with organisations, we started working with organisations before all this happened, and we continue to work with organisations, and the same organisations. So that's going to enable us to track how external shocks might derail various initiatives to promote health and well-being, including around job quality and that kind of thing. A lot of the literature would say an external shock is basically that knocks everything out, and sort of people stop thinking about well-being and health and things like that. Obviously, currently that they cannot, because it's a health risk as well. But I suppose we can look back at what happened in post 2008 in the so-called Great Recession. And there's a couple of things related to job quality there, sort of looking backwards, which could give us a few hints and lessons about what we might need to do going forward. So one of the first things, I'll sort of give another plug to Alan Felsted's team at Cardiff, who were conducting research around about that time. And some say actually the things that employees think can contribute to productivity and innovation are job quality and skill use, and sort of that input into day-to-day decisions and that kind of thing. But also those things have been in short supply since the Great Recession. So we're kind of starting from a low base in the UK, I think, especially outside of the southeast of England. So in our research, we tended, using the same data that Alan's team use, we tend to find high quality jobs are concentrated in the southeast of England, which also happens to be the only place in the UK that's internationally competitive in terms of productivity metrics. So we have regional inequalities, and we all know about those in terms of income as well. There's regional inequalities in the quality of work, and that was there before the current crisis, and it will remain there. And we really do need to do something about it. But the other thing we found, we analysed data from the Workplace Employment Relations Survey, which was collected in 2011, so it's 3 years after the financial crisis first hit. And what we found there was that organisations that had the greatest level of employee commitment were able to withstand recession reactions much better, both in terms of the well-being of their employees and also organisational performance. So, for example, where an organisation had to take some sort of action because of the recession, so that might have been shorter working hours, wage cuts or wage restrictions and those kind of things, those things did not affect well-being and performance in those organisations at higher levels of commitment. Okay, but did affect well-being and performance in those organisations at lower levels of commitment. And again, well, you can ask Colin, you can ask me, what drives organisational commitment? One of the biggest things is high quality work. So if you can work towards building better quality jobs, I think the argument I would have, and I hope Colin agrees with me, is you're going to be a lot more resilient over the coming months. And as someone that looks at health and wellbeing practices, there are other things that are into the mix, but as I've said, foremost and central is the quality of work.
That's great. Colin, Kevin's asking you there whether you agree with him. The title of this webinar was Building Workplace Wellbeing and Engagement into the New Normal for Businesses. So hopefully you do agree with him, but how do businesses go about doing that?
We always agree across the PrOPEL Hub partners, Helen. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything Kevin said. It's an odd time to be, I'm sure Kevin and you find this as well, Helen, it's an odd time to be a workplace researcher, because it's odd to, the conversations that we started having with employers a few months ago on the project that I am involved in, it was a very different economic and workplace context, and lots of the employers who a few months ago would have been open to reflecting on their workplace and HR practices as a constructive conversation around raising their own productivity are now fighting for survival. So I think there is a legitimate question about, are we still relevant? I think I would argue we are more relevant than ever. And that's again, my pitch to employers. Clearly, it's a moment of tremendous change and crisis for some employers in some sectors and for some employees. So we'll over the next weeks and months, we'll see employers moving across jobs, across sectors, new jobs being defined within sectors. If we think about the way that the retail sector may permanently change and the high street may permanently change over the weeks and months to come, that's a tremendous challenge for HR and for our workplace managers. So what is the workforce and the jobs of the future? And by the future, I mean the coming weeks, the radical future of the coming weeks. What does that look like? Of course, we're also seeing businesses whose entire business model has been recalibrated in response to COVID. So we've seen the repurposing of some businesses. We've seen a shift from delivery from a service in person to delivery. Again, big challenges for HR and management practice around how to facilitate business model changes in a way that keep your staff with you, keep them healthy and productive and innovative in the workplace. I think that's interesting. I mean, Kevin's work and my work is around jobs and job design. And again, wherever you work, everyone who's speaking on this panel and everyone who's listening in will be aware that the redesign of jobs, which is something that Kevin and I try to proactively research on and engage with businesses on, is happening in a very radical and substantial way right now. Working from home, the autonomy to work from home, keeping people productive while working at home, the use of technology to maintain productivity while people are remote in the workplace. the distancing of people when they do come back to work, which is going to be a major challenge. The redesign of jobs to allow more multitasking, to allow us to cope with all of these pressures is going to be a major challenge. The kind of employees who we are able to support to come back to work, because many of us, many employers will have to grapple with how they keep older workers, people with underlying conditions, people who've got caring roles, how they keep those workers productive and healthy in the workplace. So that it's a fascinating context in which to talk to employers about job redesign and engagement. So that's important. I completely agree with Kevin's point that I think the most resilient companies will be the companies who invest in job quality and invest in innovation. And that seems obvious because, as I was saying, we need people to adopt new roles. We need people to multitask. We need people to learn new ways of working autonomously and working with technology. That doesn't come by magic. There are workplace practices and job design practices that can either facilitate people to innovate in this challenging new environment or crush those opportunities for people to be innovative and productive and healthy. So resilient companies will find ways and need to find ways to empower their employees to innovate. I suppose the other thing, and this is a difficult conversation to sometimes lodge with employers right now, which is not in any way to take away the pressures that employers are under. But to some extent, there's an opportunity here. I know it's a tremendous challenge and there's tremendous risk to businesses at the moment, but there's an opportunity in terms of many businesses fundamentally need to redesign what they're doing. And for many businesses, there is, unfortunately, a gap in productive activity right now because of furloughing, because of lack of demand for businesses. So, I mean, I'm sure Kevin, you, Helen, and I often engage with businesses, and one of the pushbacks we get is a simple problem of opportunity cost. So businesses will often say, we'd love to work with you, we'd love to fundamentally redesign our jobs, but I've got everyone working their backsides off at 100% capacity trying to get the job done. We're at a moment here, however unpleasant and challenging that moment is, we're at a moment where there might be the scope and certainly a need for employers and their employees to think about jobs, job design, and recasting the workplace that's going to emerge as the new normal. The very last thing I would say about the challenges of COVID, and again, I think it links directly to what Kevin's already said. If you think about my own team and the kind of, if we can call it, the output variables that we're interested in, what we're really interested in is how jobs and engagement feed into two things. One, employees' well-being, which is absolutely fundamental, the idea of keeping people healthy and helping people to recover from the psychological strains of COVID and post-COVID. So we're interested in how jobs and workplace practices help employees to work healthily. And our second big outcome variable, if you like, is employees to make these kind of changes. So that's those two output variables or outcome variables that we've always been interested in seem more relevant than ever, I would argue, in a post-COVID workplace.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I kind of like to reinforce what Colin's making there in earlier points, because a lot of Colin's work is about innovation. And we don't need to think of innovation just in terms of new products and new services. Innovation occurs in the processes within organisations through a continuous improvement process. So, as Colin has mentioned previously, job quality matters for innovation. So it's going to matter for how you innovatively address the problems that you're going to have to address. And the other thing within there as well, we're all working in safety critical environments now. You know, it's not just a few industries like construction and oil and gas and nuclear power generation. We're all in safety critical environments. And as I mentioned previously, that, you know, we know that job quality, high quality work contributes to safer working practices. And one way it does this, if you look at some of the best in class firms in construction, it's a continuous improvement process. How do you do continuous improvement? The classic way, of course, is to empower employees to solve their own problems, listen to what they have to say, engage in knowledge sharing so everybody get some idea of how to make improvements and incrementally build a better workplace. So it doesn't have to be particularly complex or challenging to do. It can be something that you do incrementally and continually build up.
I think that I agree again with all of that Kevin said. I think the other thing is that this is an incredibly dynamic and challenging workplace environment that we're entering into. Some of the principles that have always been there in terms of as Kevin has just described, in terms of the potential positive impact of good job design, remain at play. So as I was saying, the starting point for our research is to really try and expand this evidence base that says, and to try and solidify the evidence base about what does engagement mean, what does good job design mean in this context, and how robustly can we identify a relationship between jobs, engagement, and people innovating and solving problems in the workplace. I think there's still a lot of work to do to really shore up and build on that evidence base. But at the same time, these principles of trying to ensure that people have a good balance in terms of job demands and job resources, an interest in employees being engaged. Obviously, you mentioned that employee engagement as being something of a buzzword. I'm not sure, obviously, as someone who researches it, I'm not sure I would entirely agree, but there's certainly been very strong interest in work engagement and employee engagement. And I think it's because, long before COVID, there's basically been a fundamental shift in how a lot of organisations seek competitive advantage. First, I think there's been a kind of attempt to throw out Taylorism, quite rightly so, a shift away from command and control towards much more progressive, innovation-focused HR practices. So it's a question of how do you do it and what kind of jobs deliver that innovation rather than a sort of command and control approach. Clearly, there's a structural element in the UK labour market as well. Our labour market and our economy is primarily service-based. And many employers in a city like my own here in Glasgow are seeking competitive advantage in terms of a service offer. So what's your offer to the customer that is really going to attract that customer, stimulate that customer in a very competitive environment? And again, I think there's a general shift and a content in that which will survive COVID that says the resilient organisation, the organisation that can find a segment in these highly competitive service markets, is the organisation that empowers employees to try and engage with the customers, engage with the broader market and solve problems and offer something a bit different. How do we do it? By supporting people to be innovative. And then lastly, I think Kevin and I would constantly get back to the idea of employee well-being. Clearly, there's been a massive shift in the last 10, 20 years towards organisations accepting a greater sense of responsibility for employee well-being and also acknowledging the benefits of employee well-being. There's a very obvious business benefit that if your people are healthy and productive, they're likely to stay with you and not go off sick. So that's a basic business argument. So those three arguments, a shift away from command and control to an HR world that tries to empower people, a focus on well-being, and a focus on finding brilliant ways to deliver better services. I think those were things that were very much in the minds of many employers pre-COVID. And post-COVID, if you want your business to survive, I think those three principles are still strong and very much centred in with our research and the team, the work that Kevin and his team do.
Yeah, no, related on that kind of well-being piece, there's also a view in some of the businesses, or many of the businesses we talk to, that if you're not looking after someone's well-being, if you're not providing with people with interesting and meaningful work, go and work somewhere else. Yeah. I think that a lot of the stimulus for this is basically it's about recruitment and retention, as well as all the other things that we've mentioned. And I think there is a view in business, I'm not sure whether I share this view, but it's certainly been articulated to me that the younger generation, cannot be bought off by pay rises anymore. They want something more from work than maybe wasn't the case 20 years ago or something like that. So I think there are lots of imperatives. And a time of tumultuous change is probably the best time to engage in more radical thinking anyway.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I took from both of your descriptions of what you have found in your research is that redesign may be necessary, and what's going on now is everyone is being forced to redesign. So even if you didn't want to, now is the time when you're going to be having to put some thought into how you manage people, what the nature of their jobs is. This is where we can build in this idea of building back better, or the new normal being something that addresses well-being and engagement, and also some of the inequalities you were talking about, Kevin. You know, we've had inequalities exposed by the crisis, but you've talked about them in the workplace as well. So that's something that through the PrOPEL Hub we hope to be discussing. I think that you have given really good reasons why well-being and engagement aren't buzzwords. So I'm glad you both did that and rose to the challenge, because it seems like it's a really tangible way of strengthening a business and getting it so that people can problem solve and be involved in continuous improvement. So you've given us lots of examples of how it can improve businesses and organisations. But what are your key messages to businesses and organisations now about how to start and where to look first?
Do you want me to do that one? Or?
But you go first.
Okay, I think the message we're trying to get off here is that, you know, work and the quality of work matters for a lot of things, a lot of important outcomes. And so it's a case of how organisations are able to build that. I think on top of that, the thing we haven't mentioned, we touched on it in equalities, is that work organisations contribute to social communities in many ways, not through just providing employment and as a source of tax income. Work organisations that provide meaningful work provide social relationships for people, they provide a sense of purpose in their lives as well. So work organisations, the employers have got a lot to offer to help society and our communities recover, not just, you know, the economy. There's more to what organisations do and employers do than just that. I say that it doesn't have to be hard, it doesn't have to be complex. There are some relatively simple steps that organisations can take. I think we all work in multidisciplinary teams now. For a long time I only worked with fellow psychologists, and about working with economists is they want to know the price of everything. And we, you know, previously kind of ignored all that sort of stuff. So if I had, you know, X pounds to invest to invest in this, what would I do? I think the first thing I would consider is train your line managers. Let them recognise what a good quality job looks like and how they can contribute to it, because you only have to train one line manager to get multiple hits of the people that they manage. That's likely to be very cost effective. And most of the things, and the most important relationship you have at work often is with your line manager. There are lots of things in job quality can be achieved just through training line management. That's things around delegation, communication, clarification and communication, those kind of things. Coaching and also building team cohesion. In relation to team cohesion, that's one of the easiest things that you can do. You know, build social relationships, just get people to do stuff together. So that's things like problem solving workshops. No, that's not difficult. You spend an hour a week sort of thinking about how you might improve work processes. And the other simple thing you can do, which doesn't entail whole scale system design, is allow people to build continuous improvement into their own jobs so they can see how they could improve what they do and how they do it. And then they can implement that. That gives them a greater sense of ownership of the job, as well as enabling, you know, people to build jobs that are more suited to their skills and abilities. Of course, you know, that has to be done within reason, of course, but it's possible to make these minor incremental improvements to how jobs are done. And if I may just go on a little bit, I think there's some key things to bear in mind. So, yeah, sometimes, you know, the best will in the world, things go wrong, so you have to persevere and have commitment. And I'm reminded of a guy called Stuart Kellogg, who is managing director of a company called Label Appeal. And when I worked in the Midlands, we used to get Stuart to come and talk to our undergraduates. And it tells this story about introducing a new performance management system, which apparently only caused one fight amongst the machinists. But he worked on that. Him and his team turned that business around largely through empowering people to take decisions, clarifying what needed to be done, upskilling people, all that kind of stuff. And Labour is a great example there. The people you employ will need to see the purpose of what you're doing. So it's pointless just saying, here, you've got more autonomy and skill use now. There needs to be a communication about why it is happening, what you're trying to achieve, how does it relate to the organisation's values and what the organisation's trying to do. There won't be just one change. It's, I'm mentioning continuous improvement. So the communication needs to portray that kind of, what's going on as a whole, as well as how things fit together. And generally, the recommendation in this kind of area is to try and use existing systems and processes to make the improvements. So I'll give you an example of a Northern Irish construction company called Graham that we did a bit of work with. So they actually built discussions about health and well-being into performance appraisal, which was they thought a logical extension about talking about how people would develop their own skill sets as part of the performance appraisal process. So they use an existing system to do things. But of course, if you've got long hours cultures where people are expected to turn up to work and do nothing productive in particular, but apart from be seen, then you need to sort of create new ways of looking at things, new behavioural norms and those kind of things as well.
That sounds great. There's a lot of food for thought there, Kevin. Do you want to add to that, Colin? We were talking about key messages to business and how they start now.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe to take a step back, you commended my side of the room, Helen, for answering the question on, is this just a buzzword? And I think before I talk about some of the things that businesses can do, the first thing to say is there's no magic bullet, and of course everything is highly contextualized, and we're not advocating for a one-size-fits-all approach. In fact, to plug again, if you would like my team to work one-to-one with your business and to talk about the context in which your business seeks to promote engagement and well-being and innovation within the specific context of your sector and your workplace, then we're very happy to have those discussions. Take a step back about it, because in the world of employee engagement, we sometimes do still have this pushback that, oh my God, not another engagement survey, and is it a buzzword? And I think maybe the first thing that we can do is to resolve that problem and ensure that if you're building an engagement strategy that's trying to support workplace innovation, that it's not a buzzword. So I think one of the problems why employee engagement maybe has something of a bum rap in some of the discussions is that it isn't so much rooted for some strategies and for some employers. It's not sufficiently rooted in jobs, and it's seen as something that comes from the top down. So I think there's a lot of engagement strategies out there that I've seen in companies I work with, which are perfectly well-meaning strategies that talk about ensuring that employees understand the vision of the company and ensuring that the company lives the values. I should say I'm not criticising any of this. My own university has an excellent vision statement, an excellent values statement, and we are very connected to that and interested in that. But that only gets us so far. And in fact, job quality is what really matters if you want people to feel engaged and to be well in the workplace and to be innovative in the workplace. So I think that's the first thing. And I'll speak a little bit more in a second, if I may, about how we define job quality and how we think it connects with engagement and innovation. So I think we have to be clear about our concepts rather than a kind of waffly engagement statement. That's the first thing that organisations have to be clear about. Do stuff would be my second piece of advice to organisations. I think the other reason that engagement has a bum rap is that there are many companies where employees dread the awful annual exercise of the engagement survey, where you spend an hour of your life that you're never going to get back filling in a very long survey and then nothing happens. There's an interesting finding from the last workplace employment relations survey that demonstrates that organisations that run an engagement survey but don't do any follow-up, any specific activities in relation to that engagement survey, have less rather than more engaged employees. So if you want to destroy employee engagement in your organisation, stick out a survey and then do nothing about it. Compare that with, for instance, some of the organisations that I've worked with. Very recently, we did a piece of evaluation work with NHS Scotland, looking at its work engagement strategy, which is called iMatter. And we spoke to more than 100 employees about their experiences of the iMatter engagement process, and generally received very strong and positive feedback. Why? Because those employees said to us, the only reason we do this, the only reason iMatter exists, is to inform action at team level. So employees were very clear that yes, there was data being gathered here, but the only reason the data was being gathered was so that managers and employees could sit down together and talk about communication, and talk about feedback, and talk about access to training and learning, all the things that we know are really important job resources. So it needs to be action focused. And then the last thing I would say is that I think in order to reverse the kind of the skepticism towards an engagement agenda is that you need to have robust measures and a clear understanding and definition of the concepts that we're using. And I think, again, in the world of employee engagement, where I do research, one of the other problems has been that there's far too many definitions out there. There's some rather dodgy companies who have got rather dodgy measures around what employee engagement is. One of the things that we want to do is to bring together some very robust, well-established and validated measures and definitions of what we mean by work engagement and job quality. And if you'll allow me for a second, because I guess some of our listeners might be thinking, these people keep talking about job quality and engagement. What do they mean? Let me tell you from my perspective what I mean by that. The definitions that we use have been around in various forms for about the last 20 years. They're rooted in very robust psychological research, and they are connected concepts of job quality in terms of what we might call job demands and resources. We call it the job demands resources model, and a measure of work engagement. So what we are really interested in, what we think is a very useful measure of employees' engagement and how that might impact both innovation and well-being, what we're really interested in is how people feel about their jobs. And there's maybe three ways to think about how people might feel engaged around their work. One, we use this idea of vigor or invigoration. So do you personally feel resilient and energized in your work environment? Secondly, we talk about absorption. So do you feel immersed and happy and keen to concentrate on the work that you do? And lastly, we talk about dedication. So do you find meaning in the work that you do? So these ideas of vigor, absorption, dedication, we've got very robust measures for them. We think they're very meaningful measures of what engagement means. It's a series of feelings. It's a motivational state that employees feel. There's a couple of things about that way of thinking about employee engagement. One, as I was saying, it's very solid. It's been used a lot, and we think there's very strong evidence that it predicts things like employee well-being and a whole range of areas of employee performance. One area of employee performance that it predicts tends to be inevitable further development. So work engagement matters. The other reason that work engagement as a concept really matters is that if you think about those feelings that I've just talked about, a feeling of invigoration, really energized and resilient in your work, a feeling of absorption, really getting immersed in the work that you do, a feeling of dedication, actually finding your work meaningful and worth doing. The only way to elicit those kind of positive feelings in employees is to invest in good quality jobs, I would argue. So this takes me back to my thing about the vision statement, the values statement, having good communication, nothing against any of these things. I believe in all, in vision and values and communication, but that doesn't elicit these very important positive feelings amongst employees. The thing that does elicit those kind of positive feelings amongst employees are jobs that are challenging, because actually people want to be challenged in the workplace, but jobs that are also resourceful. And by resourceful, we connect back to exactly the kind of job quality components that Kevin's been talking about. So opportunities to develop, opportunities to learn new stuff, not just about the job that you're doing right now, but learn new stuff that you can use to innovate and to connect with practice across your organization. Experiencing support from your peers, support from your line manager. I often say to my students that maybe as an HR practitioner, maybe the single most important question that you could ever ask your employees is, what happens when you turn around to a colleague or to a line manager and say, I'm really struggling here, can you help me out? Because employees who feel supported in the workplace and where the work where management practice supports employees are much more likely to be engaged, have much better well-being outputs, and are more productive for the organisation. So things like development, opportunities to learn, feeling supported in the workplace, crucially feedback and good communication loops between employees, managers and different teams. Those are the kind of job resources that both mitigate the demands of work, and very often we have to work hard, or we have workload challenges, or we have to juggle multiple tasks. If we can mitigate those kind of demands with resourceful jobs, we will elicit those kind of positive feelings that we think are really important in terms of people feeling invigorated and absorbed and dedicated in their work. And we think that this might lead to people being more innovative in the workplace, to delivering for organizations, for helping those organizations to be more resilient in a time of crisis, and in supporting employees to maintain their well-being in what is a very challenging and dynamic time in the workplace. Sorry, I've rambled on there.
That's all right. Thank you very much. Vigour, dedication, and absorption. Who wouldn't want that? It's something that it would be lovely if we could, as a PrOPEL Hub, get information out to people so they can start to work on making sure that high quality jobs are built into the new normal. We've got about 9 minutes left, so I was going to move on to people's questions. So now is the time if you want to open the question and answer and offer some questions to us. We'll give you a moment to do that. The chat is disabled, by the way, so it's just through the question and answer that we can take questions. And while we're giving you a moment to type those in, I'm going to take host's privilege and ask you one of my own. I suppose we've talked very much about what does a good job look like, and you know, there's a real stream running through both of what you say about how productivity and innovation are linked to well-being and engagement. Are there any tensions at all between those, or is it something that was always a win-win? If you try and create high-quality jobs, productivity will benefit?
I think, yeah, there can be tensions. I think it depends how organisations go about resolving those tensions. As I've mentioned, it's usually the case. So, well, you try and get something that, you know, compatibility with existing systems. Occasionally, if things are really bad, then you just have to say, well, actually, we need to do something new, you know, radically new, and confront that. I suppose it's one of these things that a lot of it comes down to. Our thinking now is very much around organisational culture. That's a buzzword that never seems to go away, culture. But if, you know, it's thinking about it, and so some of the more proactive employers that, you know, we've done work with come to this kind of view that it's actually about culture. And like one of the definitions of organisational culture, as I'm sure all the academics and most of the employers in here will know, it's defined as the way we do things around here, and doing things isn't that how you do your job. So I think there's a very close connection between what you want to be as an organisation and how people do their jobs, because they should be reflecting those things. So to go back to Colin and his mission statements and visions, as everybody knows, they are not really organisational culture. It is what people do and what people, you know, think and act on a day-to-day basis, which really does represent what the organisation is about. So jobs and how people do their jobs are absolutely critical to that, and I think that's a way of resolving the tension, if it does exist, is to think, well, what kind of organisation do we want to be? Do we want to be the kind of organisation that doesn't have dedicated, absorbed, or vigorous, you know, employees?
I think I would agree with all of that, and it's something that when you do face-to-face research with employers and employees, it's something that we are concerned about, because I'm even evangelizing here for people to be invigorated and dedicated and absorbed in their work. We have to be careful that that doesn't lead to a kind of ask on employees, where not only have you got to deliver your work and hit your targets, but you've got to demonstrate how amazingly engaged that you are all the time. So we have to be careful around that. We also have to be careful where my team and various other researchers in this space are interested in empowering people to redesign their own work or to support teams to enhance job quality, that again, there isn't too much of a shift towards the employee. One of the practices that my own team will be taking forward with the organisations that we are working with in this space is the idea of job crafting, which is basically sitting down with managers and employees and saying to those employees, let's think about the components of your job that are resourceful, the idea that I had earlier, the concept that I had earlier, and really try and reinvest as much of your energy in those aspects of your job, and think about less time and energy going on things that are not productive or resourceful. That's asking employees to do work, to do some heavy lifting around the job resources and job design process. So again, we have to be careful to make this a collaborative effort where HR, line managers, the organisation, and of course us, my research team and the broader research community, are part of a collaborative process that supports employees.
Colin, you've done the amazing thing of answering someone's question before I even asked it to you. So we had a question was, how can employees be empowered by managers to take action on their own well-being and engagement, and how can the culture in an organisation be changed to allow this? So I think you've been talking there about job crafting and about collaboration. So amazingly, you'd answered it before I even asked you.
I thank you. That was fortunate. I think there are specific areas of practice, and again, there is no magic bullet here, but there are specific areas of practice that we need to also think about. Again, connecting back to much of what Kevin has said, I think in much of Kevin's discussion, but along with lots of other brilliant ideas, a concept that I've heard a lot is around voice, around giving the employees a sense of voice and hearing what people's concerns are, and also what their ideas are, and getting people involved in decision-making processes. So the kind of practices that I've just talked about can be effective in certain spaces, but employee voice in a range of different spaces within organisations where people can either raise concerns or raise ideas and get those ideas heard and actioned, I think is incredibly important. Again, go back to my example of working with the National Health Service on engagement issues. The engagement structure itself, the model itself, was co-produced. Co-production being a big idea in the NHS. So they said, we don't want to impose an engagement exercise on you, you build it. Let's build it together. So voice throughout the process. And then, as I was saying, the whole idea of why are we doing this? It's in order for you to voice your concerns or ideas and then affect change in the workplace. I should say the other thing I always say to my HR students on this is, nobody's saying any of this is easy. I mean, to some extent, it's a lot easier to write yourself a vision statement and stick it on your website than it is to do the real heavy lifting of trying to think about jobs and job design, how organisations are required to invest. And again, we're not naive. We're not saying that doing this work isn't an investment. I think the point that Kevin and I both made is that there's a strong evidence base that suggests that there's a potential return on this investment in terms of absence, employee performance, productivity, and bottom line for organisations.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I think to add to the point, if I may, about sort of involving employees, it's also important. You know, it's also important that senior managers don't just sort of like say, well, it's all down to you now. There needs to be support from management and resourcing. In the words of one of our interviewees, this has to have teeth. So there's a really important role for managers to play in all of this. So it's so important to engage workers and talk to them about how to improve things, as Toyota do around their continuous improvement. But it needs to be backed up by management action as well. So because the evidence is where you know, it's just all passed over to employees to do it with no support, then it doesn't, you know, it won't work. It does need that commitment management as well.
That's great, thank you. Well, we're drawing to a close now, so thank you to everyone for offering questions. And if you still have something you want to discuss with PrOPEL Hub, we have a website that is live now, so www.propelhub.org, and we have our contact details on there. So if there's anything you'd like to talk to us about, please get in touch via that website. Also, I've got a few plugs. Again, we like to do plugs for other launch events that I'm just going to run through in a moment. But before I do that, I just want to sort of sum up a little bit. One thing that Colin said was do stuff. And one thing that kept repeating in what Kevin said was, and learn from it. So I think that's what I'd like to finish on, is the idea that well-being and engagement are important. We can build them into our new normal for business if we do stuff and we learn from it. And please be in touch about that. We want to hear about it. So yes, please, well, you can't give a big hand. You can do it at home if you like, but say thank you very much to Colin Lindsay and Kevin Daniels and our technical host, Claire Glancy at PrOPEL Hub, for making this webinar run smoothly. And I want to say thank you very much for making it such an interesting discussion. And now I'm just going to finish on a few plugs, and then I'll let you all get away, hopefully mostly on time. So this is week 1 of our launch of PrOPEL website. We've just done the webinar Job Quality Matters. On the 17th, we're going to have a podcast going live on our website called Thriving in Uncertainty, the Power of Entrepreneurial Leadership and the Need for Community. That will have Professor Monda Ram from Aston University and Professor Eleanor Shaw from the University of Strathclyde. You'll be able to look at that on our website on the 17th. Then on the 18th, we've got another webinar, a CIPD policy event on Working Life Scotland with CIPD and Graham Roy from the University of Strathclyde. Then we go into week 2 of our PrOPEL launch. On the 22nd, we've got a podcast launching on our website called Fair Work in the context of COVID-19. That'll be Professor Alan Felstead from Cardiff University and Professor Patricia Findlay from University of Strathclyde with Ed Houghton from the CIPD. Then on the 24th of June, we've got another podcast, Managing in a COVID-19 World. That's again Patricia Findlay with Professor Richard Saundry and Dr. Martin McCracken of Sheffield and Ulster. Then our final launch webinar is on the 25th of June called Outlook on UK Productivity Post-COVID-19. Again, we've got Graham Roy involved in that, Dr. Stuart McIntyre from the University of Strathclyde, Dr. Cher Lee and Professor Richard Neller from the University of Nottingham. So please do have a little look at our website, www.propelhub.org, and be in touch. We really want to hear what's going on and what you would like from us over the next few years of our project. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.